The damp air clung to the brush on Jackass Hill, thick with the scent of wet leaves and the murky, stagnant breath of the Cuyahoga River below. It was September 23rd, 1935, a Monday afternoon in Cleveland, Ohio, where the sky hung low and gray, mirroring the crushing weight of the Great Depression that had settled over the city like a shroud. In the overgrown ravines of Kingsbury Run, a sprawling, desolate stretch of land where the desperate and the forgotten built shanties, out of scrap wood and rusting metal, two young boys were trying to find a game to play in the dirt. They were racing each other, scrambling up the steep, muddy embankment, their laughter cutting through the heavy silence of the ravine. But the laughter didn't last long. One of the boys stopped. He'd spotted something in the weeds, partially hidden by the browning vegetation of early autumn. It looked like old clothes at first, just piles of discarded fabric left to rot in the undergrowth. A common sight in a place where people owned almost nothing and threw away even less. But as the boy stepped closer, the shape resolved into something else, something pale, something waxy. The boy froze. The damp earth beneath his sneakers seemed to shift, the world tilting on its axis. He wasn't looking at a pile of rags. He was looking at a human body. But it was wrong. It was terribly, impossibly wrong. The body was naked, save for a pair of socks. The skin was drained of color, possessing the artificial sheen of a mannequin, and where the neck should have been, there was only a clean, dark severance. It had no head. Panic, cold and sharp, seized the boys. But the horror wasn't finished with them yet. Just a few feet away, obscured by the same tangle of brush and refuse, lay a second body, this one also naked, this one also headless. The boys turned and ran, their screams echoing off the ravine walls, scrambling back toward civilization, toward police who would soon descend on Jackass Hill with grim faces and churning stomachs. When the coroner arrived, the true depravity of the scene became clear. These weren't just murders. This was butchery performed with surgical precision. Both victims were male. Both had been emasculated. And perhaps most chilling of all, both bodies had been completely drained of blood before they were dumped here. There was no blood on the ground, no sign of a struggle in the mud. They had been killed somewhere else, somewhere private, prepared like livestock, and then discarded like trash in the city's backyard. The police found a chemical on the skin, a preservative, turning the flesh reddish and leathery. One body had been dead for days, the other for weeks, yet they were laid out together. A taunt, a message. Cleveland was about to enter a nightmare that would haunt it for decades. They called him the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. He would claim at least 12 victims, maybe more. He would decapitate them, dismember them, and leave them in the shadow of the terminal tower, mocking the authorities with every gruesome discovery. And despite the efforts of the legendary Eliot Ness, the butcher would never be caught. He simply stopped. Or maybe he just moved on. But why do we know the name Ted Bundy? Why does the name Jeffrey Dahmer conjure immediate images of horror? Why do we know exactly how John Wayne Gacy fit bodies into his crawl space? Because they were caught. Because their crimes were catalogued, their faces plastered on newspapers, their trials televised for a captive audience. We find a strange comfort in the court monster. We can study them, categorize them, put them in a box behind bars, and tell ourselves that evil has a face, and that face is locked away. We tell ourselves that the system works, that the bad guys eventually slip up, that justice always arrives. But the Mad Butcher represents a different kind of fear, a deeper, more primal terror, the fear of the predator who wins. History is written by the victors, and in the world of serial homicide, the ultimate victory is anonymity. For every Bundy who craved the spotlight, for every Gacy who smiled for the cameras, there are the phantoms, the ones who operated in the silence between the headlines, the ones who understood that if you pick the right victims, the transients, the sex workers, the runaways, the people society has already decided don't matter, You can kill forever. You can walk the streets with blood under your fingernails, and neighbors will wave to you. You can build a life, raise a family, and grow old, while the trophies of your hunts rot in shallow graves that no one is looking for. The 20th century was a golden age for these phantoms, a time of massive social upheaval, of wars that displaced millions, of a depression that forced people onto the road and into the shadows. It was a time before DNA profiling, before centralized databases, before surveillance cameras watched our every move. It was a time when a man could drift from town to town, changing his name as easily as he changed his shirt, leaving a trail of bodies that no one ever connected. We like to think we know the face of evil. We think of the clown, the handsome law student, the cannibal. But the most successful predators are the ones you have never heard of. They are the ones whose names never made the history books, the ones whose case files are gathering dust in the basements of rural police stations, marked cold and forgotten, the ones who didn't get nicknames from the press because the press never even noticed they were there. In this documentary, we aren't going to rehash the stories you already know. We aren't going to give more screen time to the celebrities of the true crime world. Instead, we are going to walk into the dark corners of history. We are going to dig up the floorboards of the past and shine a light on the monsters who got away with it. We will travel from the foggy ravines of Depression-era Cleveland to the sun-bleached highways of the 1970s. We will look at the killers who used the chaos of war, the indifference of poverty, and the cracks in the system to satisfy their darkest urges. These are the stories of the unknown, the unsolved, the overlooked. These are the worst serial killers you have never heard of. And once you hear their stories, you will realize that the scariest thing isn't the monster under the bed. It's the monster walking free on the street outside your window right now. The Great Depression hangs over Cleveland like a shroud of coal smoke. It is September 23rd, 1935, and the city is starving. The industrial heart of America is beating, but the rhythm is irregular, labored, broken by the shuffling feet of thousands of unemployed men who drift into the city looking for salvation and finding only dust. They gather in the forgotten places, in the gullies, the ravines, the dried-up riverbeds. They build homes out of scrap wood and cardboard in a place the locals call Kingsbury Run. It is a scar that runs through the city, a jagged ravine filled with weeds, refuse, and the invisible people that society has decided to stop seeing. But on this afternoon, two young boys are about to see something they will never be able to unsee. They are playing near a place known affectionately, or perhaps mockingly, as Jackass Hill. It is a steep, brush-covered slope overlooking the grim reality of the shanty towns. The boys are climbing, exploring, pushing through the sumac and the briars, doing what boys do to escape the grey reality of 1935. One of them spots something pale in the weeds, a shape that doesn't belong. It looks like a mannequin, perhaps a discarded piece of store display, thrown down the ravine like so much other garbage. They get closer. The air is thick, with the smell of damp earth and rot. The boys freeze. It isn't a mannequin. It is a man, or rather, it is most of a man. The body is naked, lying in the underbrush, stripped of dignity and humanity. But what makes the boys scramble back up the hill, their breath catching in their throats, their screams trapped in their chests, is not just the death, it is the desecration. The man has been decapitated. His head is gone. When the Cleveland police arrive, descending into the run with their heavy boots and grim faces, they find that the nightmare is actually double. Just a few yards away from the first body, they find a second. This one is also male, also naked, also decapitated. But the differences between them tell a chilling story about the monster who put them there. The first victim, the one the boys saw, has been dead for days. Decomposition has begun its ugly work. But the second man, he is relatively fresh. The blood is still tacky, The skin hasn't yet taken on the grey pallor of long-term decay. He was likely killed just a few days prior. The killer had returned to the same spot, the same dumping ground, to discard a second broken toy right next to the first. And then, the coroner makes a discovery that turns this from a sordid double murder into something that will haunt the city for decades. The heads are found nearby, but the separation wasn't the result of a frenzied attack. It wasn't a jagged, hacking mess caused by an axe or a dull blade swung in anger. The heads were removed with surgical precision. The cuts are clean. The skin is retracted. The muscles are sliced, not torn. The vertebrae are separated neatly. The killer didn't just murder these men. He dismantled them. Furthermore, the bodies have been drained of blood. Not just bled out from the wounds, but drained. Systematically. Dry. The killer had possessed the time, the privacy, and the knowledge to treat these human beings like livestock in a slaughterhouse. Police managed to identify the fresher victim quickly. His name is Edward Andrassy. He was 28 years old, a drifter, a man who moved through the underbelly of Cleveland's nightlife. He was known to the police, known to the hospitals, known to the people who lived in the shadows. He had a history of petty crime, a history of existing on the margins. But Andrassy wasn't invisible. He had a name. He had a face. The other man, the older victim, is never identified. He becomes simply John Doe I, a ghost, a man who lived and died without leaving enough of a mark for anyone to claim him. He had been dead for weeks, treated with chemical preservatives before being dumped. Think about that. The killer kept him, preserved him, lived with the body before deciding to discard it in the weeds of Jackass Hill. The press catches wind of the gruesome discovery immediately. But there is a sense of optimism. In Cleveland, after all, they have a secret weapon. They have a hero. The city's safety director is none other than Eliot Ness, the untouchable, the man who brought down Al Capone in Chicago. He is young, handsome, incorruptible, and fiercely competent. The public believes that Ness will sweep into the investigation, apply his legendary pressure, and the killer will be found in a week. They are wrong. Eliot Ness is about to meet a darkness that doesn't care about prohibition laws or organized crime syndicates. A darkness that doesn't want money or territory. A darkness that wants only heads. Months pass. The winter of 1935 descends on Cleveland. The wind screams off Lake Erie, turning the city into an icebox. The snow covers the trash in Kingsbury Run, hiding the squalor under a blanket of white. And under that cover, the butcher works. The 26th of January, 1936. A woman is walking past a manufacturing building on East 20th Street in the early hours of the morning. It is still dark, the cold biting at her face. She notices 2 bushel baskets sitting near the wall. They look out of place, abandoned. She approaches, curious, perhaps hoping for something valuable, something usable in these lean times. She looks inside. The scream that tears through the morning air wakes the neighborhood. Inside the baskets are the dismembered remains of a woman. They are wrapped in newspaper, packed tight, but once again, the head is missing. Police scour the area. They search backyards, alleyways, trash cans. 10 days later, they find the head wrapped in burlap, buried in a vacant lot nearby. The victim is identified as Florence Polillo. She was 42 years old. Like Andrassy, she lived on the edge. A waitress, a barmaid, a woman who struggled to keep her head above water in a city that was drowning. She lived in the Roaring Third, a neighborhood known for vice, for gambling, for desperation. The autopsy reveals the same terrifying signature. The cause of death wasn't the decapitation. It was the murder, followed by the precise, almost ritualistic dismantling of the body. The killer took his time. He knew anatomy. He knew how joints fit together. He knew how to take a human being apart. Fear begins to seep into the foundations of the city. This isn't a gang war. This isn't a lover's quarrel. This is a predator hunting the weak. June 5th, 1936. Summer has returned, bringing heat and flies to the run. Two young men are walking through the woods in the Kingsbury Run area, likely looking for scrap metal or a place to fish. Instead, they find the headless body of a man. This victim becomes known as the Tattooed Man. His body is a canvas of ink. On his left leg, a butterfly. On his arm, the names Helen and Paul. On the other arm, a flag. These are identifying marks. These are the roadmap to a name, a history, a family. Police release sketches of the tattoos to newspapers across the country. They show the images in newsreels before movies. Thousands of people see the ink. Do you know this man? The headlines ask. Do you know Helen? Do you know Paul? No one answers. Despite the unique markings, despite the massive publicity, the tattooed man remains nameless. He is just another victim of the butcher, stripped of his identity as thoroughly as he was stripped of his life. The killer has done something impossible. He has taken a man with his history written on his skin and erased him completely. The head is never found. The summer of 1936 becomes a season of terror. The heat is oppressive, tempers are short, and the police are helpless. Eliot Ness, the man who could do no wrong, is baffled. He orders raids on the shantytowns. He rounds up vagrants. He interrogates hundreds of people. But the killer is a phantom. He leaves no fingerprints. He leaves no witnesses. He leaves only parts. July 22nd, 1936. A teenage girl is hiking in the woods near Big Creek, a tributary that feeds into the Cuyahoga River. She is miles away from Kingsbury Run, in a quieter, more residential area. She pushes through a thicket and stumbles upon a horror that defies description. It is a head. Just a head, resting on the ground, as if placed there. Police arrive and begin a frantic search of the surrounding woods. The following day, they find the body lying some distance away. The victim is a man, estimated to be around 40 years old. His clothes are piled neatly nearby. There is blood on the clothes, suggesting he was killed while dressed and then stripped. Think about the sequence of events. The killer murdered this man. Then, while the body was bleeding, he undressed him. He took the time to remove the bloody garments, stack them, and then proceed with the mutilation. It implies a level of control that borders on the inhuman. It implies a total lack of fear. He wasn't rushing to escape. He was completing a task. The coroner notes the same surgical precision, the same clean cuts, the same draining of blood. The papers are now calling him the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. The name sticks. It suggests savagery, a meat cleaver swinging in the dark. But the police know better. This isn't a butcher, in the crude sense. This is a technician. September 10th, 1936. A man, tripping over an obstruction in a creek bed in the Run, finds the upper half of a torso. No legs, no arms, no head. Just the trunk of a human being washed up in the muck. Police search the stagnant water. They drag the creek bottom with hooks. They find the lower half of the torso. But the head is gone. The victim is never identified. He is simply John Doe. Zix. Another number. Another failure. The city is on the verge of panic. People are locking their doors. They are eyeing strangers with suspicion. The homeless population, the men and women living in the shacks of Kingsbury Run, are living in a state of siege. They are the targets. They know it. The butcher is walking among them, perhaps sharing a fire, perhaps offering a bottle of whiskey, perhaps smiling that quiet, empty smile before the knife comes out. And Eliot Ness is feeling the heat. The press, which once hailed him as a savior, is now asking hard questions. Why can't the untouchable catch a single man? Why are bodies piling up in the shadow of the terminal tower? Ness is a man of action, a man of force. He understands organized crime. He understands hierarchies and motives. But this is chaos. This is irrationality made flesh. The killings stop for a moment as 1,936 bleeds into 1,937. A brief respite, a moment for the city to catch its breath. But it is a false dawn. In February of 1937, the upper half of a woman's torso washes ashore at Euclid Beach. She hasn't been in the water long. The lake has preserved her, but it has also battered her. 3 days later, the lower half of the torso washes up, but the head is missing. The arms are missing. This victim, unlike so many others, might have a name. A woman named Rose Wallace had been reported missing by her family. She lived near the area. Dental records from the partial remains seem to match. But the identification is never 100% confirmed. Even when they think they know the victim, the butcher's work leaves a lingering question mark. July 6th, 1937. The horror returns to the river. A teenage boy finds a skull floating in the Cuyahoga River. Just a skull, picked clean by the water and the fish. Police search the riverbanks. They find a burlap sack containing a skeletonized torso. This victim is different. She had been dead for months, possibly a year. And this discovery forces the police to re-examine everything. They realize the butcher has been operating longer than they thought. They look back at a case from September 1934. A woman's torso found washed up on the shores of Lake Erie, the Lady of the Lake. At the time, it was an isolated incident. Now, it looks like a prologue. The butcher had been practicing. He had been refining his craft before he moved his workshop to Kingsbury Run. The summer of 1938 brings the nightmare to the doorstep of the police themselves. It is August 16th, 1938. Imagine the scene, the heart of downtown Cleveland, the bustle of commerce, men in suits, women in dresses, cars honking. At the corner of East 9th Street and Lakeside Avenue, workers are renovating a dumping ground near the lake. They find the body of a woman. She is wrapped in a blue double-breasted blazer, a man's blazer. She has been dismembered. Her head is wrapped in brown paper and a quilt, but it is the location that sends a chill down the spine of every detective on the force. The body was found in plain view of Eliot Ness's office window. It is a taunt. It has to be. The killer is placing his work where the safety director can see it. He is mocking the investigation. He is saying, "I am here. I am right under your nose, and you cannot see me." Later that same day, in a different dump site just a few miles away, they find a second body. A man, also decapitated, also drained of blood. 2 bodies in one day. The butcher is escalating. He is accelerating. He is laughing at them. Eliot Ness has had enough. The pressure is unbearable. The critics are calling for his resignation. The city is terrified. The shantytowns of Kingsbury Run are seen as the breeding ground for this evil, a dark forest where the wolf hides. Ness decides to burn down the forest. 2 days later, on August 18th, 1938, at 12:40 inches the morning, a convoy of police cars, fire trucks, and city vehicles descends on Kingsbury Run. It is a raid of military proportions. Ness leads 11 police officers and 25 firemen into the darkness. They sweep through the shanty towns. They bang on the doors of the cardboard shacks. They order the men, women, and children out. "Get out! Move, now!" The residents, confused, terrified, clutching their meager possessions, are herded away. They are fingerprinted. They are interrogated. They are treated as suspects, as accomplices, as problems to be solved. And then the fires begin. Ness orders the shacks burned. The firemen pour kerosene. They strike matches. The homes of the destitute, the only shelter these people have in the midst of the Great Depression, go up in flames. The orange glow illuminates the night sky, casting long, dancing shadows against the industrial skyline of Cleveland. It is a desperate act, a brutal act. Ness believes that by destroying the environment, he will flush out the predator. If there are no shacks to hide in, no transient population to blend in with, the butcher will have nowhere to go. The press calls it a necessary sanitation measure. The homeless call it a betrayal. But here is the strange, frustrating twist of the story. It works. Or at least, it seems to. After the raid, after the smoke clears, and the ashes of Kingsbury run cool, the official murders stop. The butcher vanishes. Did Ness scare him off? Did the destruction of his hunting ground force him to move on? Or was he simply done? The investigation continues for years. Suspects are named. Dr. Francis Sweeney, a surgeon with a history of mental illness and a connection to the political elite, becomes the prime suspect. He is brought in. He is questioned. He is given polygraph tests that he allegedly fails. Ness is convinced Sweeney is the man. He fits the profile: medical knowledge, access, madness. But Sweeney is never charged. He is the cousin of a powerful congressman. He commits himself to a mental institution, and from inside the walls of the asylum, he sends taunting postcards to Ness for years. Postcards that mock the safety director. Postcards that Ness keeps in his desk. A constant reminder of the one who got away. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run is never caught. The case remains officially unsolved. 12 victims are officially attributed to him, but investigators believe the number could be much higher. Maybe 20, maybe more. The victims were the forgotten people, the drifters, the working poor, the people who slipped through the cracks of a broken society. They came to Cleveland looking for a life, and instead, they found a monster with a knife and a basket. Today, Kingsbury Run is different. The weeds are still there. The ravine still cuts through the city, but the shanties are gone. The physical scars of the Depression have healed over, but the psychological scar remains. It is a ghost story that Cleveland tells itself in the dark. A reminder that even in a city of steel and stone, a single man with a knife can bring everyone to their knees. But as terrifying as the Mad Butcher was, he was a specter of the past, a phantom of the Depression. The world was changing, wars were ending, technology was advancing, and with it, a new breed of killer was emerging. A killer who didn't hide in the shantytowns, but one who stood smiling on the front porch, while Cleveland was burning its shantytowns to purge a demon. Across the country, other monsters were waking up. Monsters who didn't look like butchers. Monsters who looked like neighbors. The 1930s gave way to the 40 seconds and 50 seconds. The post-war boom brought white picket fences and manicured lawns. It brought a sense of safety, of order, of the American dream realized. But behind those closed doors, the darkness hadn't disappeared. It had just changed its shape. In 1946, just a few years after the fires of Kingsbury Run had gone out, a man in Texarkana began attacking couples in parked cars. They called him the Phantom. He wore a mask. He killed with a gun. He terrorized a town just like the butcher had terrorized Cleveland. But sometimes, the killer doesn't have a nickname. Sometimes, the killer doesn't have a signature as dramatic as a severed head. Sometimes, the killer is just a man who hates. The sun sets on Cleveland, leaving the mystery of the butcher buried in the cold earth. But the story of serial murder in America was just beginning its first chapter, and as the decades rolled on, the list of names would grow longer, the methods more depraved, and the victims more numerous. Because the thing about monsters is that they don't die with the era that spawned them. They evolve, they adapt, and they are always watching. The silence of the grave is the only answer the butcher ever gave. But for the 12 men and women he dismantled, that silence is a scream that has lasted for nearly a century. Their heads were never found. Their voices were never heard. They are the eternal John and Jane Does of a city that tried to forget them. But we remember. We look at the sepia-toned crime scene photos, at the grim faces of the detectives, at the frantic headlines of the daily papers, and we see the pattern. We see the predator, and we realize that the most frightening part isn't the gore or the violence. It's the fact that he got away with it. He walked away from the smoke of Kingsbury Run, perhaps washing the soot from his hands, perhaps packing his bag, perhaps boarding a train to another city, another hunting ground. He existed. He killed. And then he was gone. And in the silence he left behind, a new question began to form. If a man can kill 12 people, decapitate them, drain their blood, and leave their bodies in plain sight of the police station without ever being caught, who else is out there? Who else is walking down the street right now, carrying a secret that would freeze the blood in your veins? The answer, as we are about to see, is that they are everywhere, and some of them are closer than you think. February 22nd, 1946. A Friday night in Texarkana, a twin city straddling the border of Texas and Arkansas like a jagged scar. The war was over. The boys were coming home. There was a sense of optimism in the air, a feeling that the horrors of the world were happening in distant places like Europe or the Pacific, far away from the piney woods and quiet streets of the American South. In Texarkana, the biggest concern for most people was finding a good spot to park on a Friday night, a place to talk, to hold hands, to steal a few moments of privacy, away from the prying eyes of parents and neighbors. Lovers' lanes were a ritual, a rite of passage. They were supposed to be safe havens in the dark, bubbles of intimacy, protected by the unspoken rules of a small town. But on this night, the rules were about to change. Jimmy Hollis, 25 years old, and Mary Jean Larry, 19, had just finished watching a movie. They drove out to a secluded spot on a gravel road known as Richmond Road. It was dark, the kind of heavy, suffocating darkness you only find in the deep country, where the city lights are just a faint glow on the horizon. They parked the car. They talked. It was innocent, mundane. The engine ticked as it cooled. The crickets sang in the high grass. And then, a light. It wasn't the soft sweep of passing headlights. It was a focused, piercing beam cutting through the darkness, blinding them. It moved closer. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking toward the driver's side door with a terrifying purpose. Jimmy watched the light approach, probably assuming it was a police officer, maybe a deputy looking to bust some kids for parking where they shouldn't. He rolled down the window, ready to explain, ready to apologize. But the voice that drifted out of the darkness didn't belong to a police officer. It was low, muffled, wrong. "I want you out of that car," the voice said. "Or I'm going to kill you." Jimmy hesitated. The beam of the flashlight hit his face, blinding him again. He tried to reason with the man. He told him he didn't have any money, that they were just talking, but the stranger wasn't interested in conversation. "Get out of the car." The command was punctuated by the metallic click of a pistol. Jimmy opened the door. Mary Jean, terrified, scrambled out the passenger side. They stood there on the gravel road, shivering in the cool February air, their hands trembling, and for the first time, they got a look at the thing that had pulled them from the safety of their vehicle. He was wearing a white mask, not a Halloween mask, not something store-bought. It was a pillowcase, or a piece of cloth with eye holes crudely cut out, a ghost standing in the moonlight, a phantom. The attacker moved with a strange, erratic energy. He told Jimmy to take off his pants. Think about the confusion in that moment, the sheer absurdity of the demand. It disoriented them, threw them off balance. Jimmy complied, his fingers fumbling with the belt buckle. his mind racing to make sense of a situation that defied all logic. He handed the pants over. The masked man took them, inspected them, and then struck. He swung the heavy pistol, the metal barrel, connecting with Jimmy's skull with a sickening crack. Jimmy went down hard. The world spun and faded to black. Now, Mary Jean was alone. Alone on a dark road with a man in a white mask who had just bludgeoned her companion. She watched as the man turned his attention to her. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for her car. He told her to run. Run. Hey, he said. She ran. She scrambled toward a ditch, her shoes slipping on the loose gravel, her breath tearing at her throat. But he was faster. He caught her, tackled her to the ground. The struggle was violent. Primal. Mary Jean fought with everything she had. She wasn't just fighting for her dignity. She was fighting for her life. The man beat her, struck her with the gun, but she kept moving, kept fighting, fueled by an adrenaline that masked the pain. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. A car was coming. The masked man froze. Like a cockroach caught in a kitchen light, he recoiled. He scrambled back to the shadows, disappearing into the woods as quickly as he had arrived. Mary Jean Larey and Jimmy Hollis survived. Battered, bloodied, traumatized, but alive. They told the police their story. They described the mask, the gun, the voice. But in 1946, in a town divided by a state line, communication between police departments wasn't seamless. Jurisdiction was messy. And crucially, nobody died. The police treated it as a vicious assault, perhaps a robbery gone wrong, or the work of a sexual sadist who got spooked. They didn't see it for what it was. They didn't know they had just witnessed the dress rehearsal. The town of Texarkana exhaled. Rumors circulated, of course. People whispered about the hook man or the maniac in the woods. But life went on. The movies still played. The diners still served coffee. And the couples still parked on the lonely roads at the edge of town. Believing that lightning doesn't strike twice, they were wrong. March 24th, 1946. A Sunday morning. The rain had been falling all night, turning the dirt roads into slick, muddy traps. A passing motorist noticed a 1941 Oldsmobile sedan parked just off a minor road in Bowie County, mostly concealed by the brush. It looked abandoned, but when the motorist got closer, he saw two figures inside. Richard Griffin was 29 years old, a veteran who had served his country and returned home to build a life. Polly Ann Moore was just 17, young, vibrant, with her whole future stretching out ahead of her. They had been dating for a few weeks. They had gone out for a drive, maybe to listen to the rain on the roof, maybe to talk about their day. They were found in the car. Richard was on his knees between the front seats, his head resting on his hands as if in prayer. Polly Ann was in the back seat, sprawled face down. Both had been shot in the back of the head. Execution style. The brutality of the scene shocked the seasoned investigators. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of robbery. Their pockets hadn't been turned out. The car hadn't been stripped. This was cold. This was calculated. And then the details began to align with the attack on Hollis and Larry a month earlier. A secluded road. A couple. A sudden, overwhelming violence. But this time, the killer had finished the job. He had learned from his mistakes. He hadn't let them run. He hadn't let them live to describe him. He had walked up to that car in the rain, looked inside at two human beings, and extinguished them. Police found a patch of ground nearby that was trampled and muddy. They found spent .32 caliber shell casings, but the rain had washed away tire tracks. It had washed away footprints. It had scrubbed the world clean of the killer's presence, leaving only the bodies behind. Texarkana began to twitch. The unease that had been a low hum after the Hollis and Larry attack cranked up into a high-pitched whine. Parents started telling their children to come home earlier. Gun stores noticed a slight uptick in sales, but there was still a sense of denial. Maybe it was a personal vendetta. Maybe Richard had enemies. Maybe Polly Ann had a jealous ex-boyfriend. The human mind will do anything to avoid accepting the presence of a predator who kills without reason. We want logic. We want motive. We want cause and effect. But the Phantom Killer didn't operate on logic. He operated on a schedule. April 13th, 1946. 3 weeks later, the pattern was establishing itself, though no one realized it yet. Every 3 to 4 weeks. Always on a weekend. Always a couple. Paul Martin was 17 years old. Betty Jo Booker was 15. Betty Jo was popular, talented, a musician who played the saxophone in a band called the Rhythmaires. She had played a gig that night at the VFW Club on West 4th Street. She was standing in the spotlight, making music, alive and radiant. Paul, her friend, had picked her up after the show. It was late, around 1:30 in the morning. They were just going to grab a bite to eat. Maybe drive around for a bit before heading home. They never made it. The next morning, around 6:30 a.m., a family discovered Paul Martin's body lying by the side of North Robertson Road. He had been shot 4 times. A .32 caliber weapon again. The same caliber used to kill Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. But where was Betty Jo? A massive search began. Police, volunteers, frantic family members combed the woods and the fields. Hours later, nearly 2 miles away from where Paul was found, they discovered Betty Jo Booker. Her body was behind a tree. Hidden from the road, she had been shot twice. But the scene told a darker story than just gunfire. Her saxophone case was found nearby, open and empty, the instrument gone. It was later found in the woods, silent and tarnished. The investigation revealed a terrifying sequence of events. Paul and Betty Jo had been intercepted. Paul had been shot first, likely to eliminate the threat. But Betty Jo had fled. Or maybe she had been taken. The distance between the bodies suggested a chase, a hunt. Picture a 15-year-old girl in her performance dress, running through the pitch-black woods, stumbling over roots, the sound of heavy boots crashing through the underbrush behind her. The terror she must have felt is unimaginable. The killer had taken his time with her. This wasn't just an execution. It was a game. When the news broke, Texarkana didn't just panic. It shattered. The denial was gone. The idea of a jealous ex-boyfriend or a personal vendetta evaporated. This was a monster, a phantom, who struck in the moonlight, who hunted teenagers, who killed with a cold, mechanical efficiency. The city transformed overnight. The streets, usually bustling with post-war energy, emptied as soon as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Hardware stores sold out of locks, deadbolts, window latches, but the most telling metric was the guns. People bought revolvers, shotguns, rifles, anything that could shoot. Law enforcement reported that residents were sitting in their living rooms with loaded shotguns across their laps, waiting. The police were inundated with calls. A shadow in the yard? Call the police. A strange noise on the porch? Call the police. A car driving too slow? Call the police. Texarkana was dubbed the town that dreaded sundown. The Texas Rangers were called in. Captain Manuel Lone Wolf Gonzalez, a legendary figure in Texas law enforcement, arrived in town. He was the kind of lawman they made movies about. Flamboyant, tough, experienced. He brought the full weight of the Rangers down on the city. They set up traps. They used decoys. Officers dressed as women sat in parked cars with male partners, waiting for the Phantom to strike. Teenagers volunteered to be bait. It was a desperate, dangerous game of cat and mouse. But the Phantom was watching. He saw the police cars. He saw the decoys. He saw a town arming itself against him. And so, he changed the rules again. If the roads were dangerous, if the lovers' lanes were being patrolled by Texas Rangers and terrified vigilantes, he wouldn't go to the roads. He would go where they felt safest. He would go to their homes. May 3rd, 1946. Virgil Starks, a 37-year-old farmer and welder, was sitting in his armchair in his modest farmhouse just off Highway 67, about 10 miles northeast of Texarkana. It was a Friday night. The pattern held. Virgil was listening to the radio, maybe reading the newspaper. His wife, Katie, 36, was in the bedroom, already in her nightgown. It was a domestic scene, warm and safe. The kind of scene that represents everything we work for: a home, a spouse, a moment of peace at the end of the week. Outside, in the darkness of the yard, the Phantom was standing by the window. He was watching them, just like he had watched Jimmy and Mary Jean, just like he had watched Richard and Polly Ann, just like he had watched Paul and Betty Jo. He was a voyeur of normalcy before he became an agent of chaos. At approximately 9 p.m., 2 shots rang out. They didn't come from inside the house. They came through the closed window. The glass shattered inward. Virgil Starks was hit in the back of the head. He slumped forward in his chair, the newspaper sliding from his hands, dead, before he even heard the sound of the gun. Katie heard the glass breaking. She heard the thud. She ran into the living room and saw her husband, saw the blood, saw the hole in the window. And then the terror escalated. The killer wasn't satisfied with shooting from the dark. He was coming in. Katie saw him moving toward the back door. She ran to the phone on the wall, frantically dialing for help. "Operator! Operator!" But as she held the receiver, 2 more shots exploded through the kitchen window. The bullets struck her in the face. They tore through her cheek and jaw, shattering teeth, filling her mouth with blood. She dropped to the floor, blinded by pain, choking. But Katie Starks possessed a will to survive that defies comprehension. Despite being shot in the face, despite knowing her husband was dead just feet away, despite knowing a killer was trying to breach her home, she moved. She crawled. She dragged herself out of the living room, through the bedroom, and out a side window. She fell into the dirt of the yard. She couldn't stay there. He would find her. She got up and ran, barefoot. She ran through the fields, through the rows of crops that slashed at her legs. She ran toward the nearest neighbor's house, a quarter-mile away. Blood was pouring from her face, soaking her nightgown. Her lungs were burning. Every step sent shockwaves of agony through her shattered jaw. But she kept running. She reached the neighbor's house and collapsed on the porch, banging on the door until she lost consciousness. The neighbors found her, saw the blood, and called the police. Back at the farmhouse, the killer had entered. He walked through the home he had just destroyed. He left bloody footprints on the floor. He walked over to where Virgil Starks lay dead, but he didn't stay long. Maybe he realized Katie had escaped. Maybe he heard the distant wail of sirens. He vanished back into the night, leaving the door open to the cool spring air. Katie Starks survived. She lived to tell the story of the night the Phantom came inside. The attack on the Starks farm changed everything. The Lovers Lane murders were horrific. Yes, but they happened out there, on the dark roads, to people who were taking a risk, however small. The Starks murder happened in a living room. It meant no one was safe. Not in your car, not in your bed, not in your locked house. The panic in Texarkana reached a fever pitch. The police investigation was chaotic. They arrested hundreds of suspects. Anyone who looked suspicious, anyone with a criminal record, anyone who couldn't account for their whereabouts on Friday nights. They questioned drifters, students, veterans. One name rose to the top of the list: U.L. Swinney. Swinney was a career criminal, a car thief with a long record of counterfeiting and burglary. He was in the area. His wife, Peggy, told police details that seemed to implicate him. She spoke of stolen cars, of a shirt that needed to be washed, of his erratic behavior on the nights of the murders. It looked like a break. It looked like the end. But there was a problem. Peggy Swinney was an unreliable witness. Under the law at the time, a wife could not be compelled to testify against her husband, and without her testimony, the physical evidence was thin. There was no DNA, no fingerprints that could be definitively linked to the murders. The ballistics were consistent, and the .32 caliber, but they couldn't match the specific gun, because the gun was never found. The police were stuck. They knew, or they felt they knew, that Swinney was their man, but they couldn't prove it in a court of law for murder. So, they settled. They nailed him on a car theft charge. A habitual offender statute allowed them to lock him up for life for being a repeat criminal. Yul Swinney went to prison in 1947, and the murders stopped. The phantom never struck again. Was it Swinney? Most investigators believe so. The timing fits. The cessation of the murders fits. But Swinney never confessed. He spent his life in prison, filing appeals, claiming innocence, playing the system. He died in 1994, taking his secrets to the grave. But there are others who doubt. They point to the different MO at the Starks farm. They point to inconsistencies in the witness descriptions. Jimmy Hollis said the killer was a tangent-skinned white man. Others said he was dark-skinned. Some said he was tall. Others said medium build. Was the phantom one man? Was it two? Was the Starks murder a copycat, utilizing the fear gripping the town to settle a score? We will never know. The phantom killer left behind 5 bodies and a town permanently scarred by fear. He exposed the fragility of safety. He showed us that the line between a peaceful Friday night and a massacre is as thin as a pane of glass. And he did something else. He created a legacy. Every year, people tell the story. They watch the movie based on the crimes. They speculate on the identity of the man in the white mask. But the truth is lost to the pine woods and the muddy roads of 1946. Think about the victims for a moment. Not as statistics, but as people. Paul Martin, playing saxophone, loving music. Betty Jo Booker, just 15, probably worrying about a math test or a boy she liked. Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore, seeking a moment of quiet connection in a loud world. Virgil Starks, reading his paper, thinking about the crops, thinking about tomorrow. They didn't know they were characters in a horror story. They were just living their lives. And then, a shadow fell across them. A flashlight clicked on. A window shattered. And everything ended. That is the true horror of the phantom. He didn't just kill people. He killed the feeling of safety. He killed the idea that if you are good, if you follow the rules, if you stay close to home, you will be okay. In the end, the phantom killer of Texarkana remains a ghost. He walked out of the cornfield that night in May 1946 and simply kept walking right out of history and into legend, leaving us with only the questions, the graves, and the lingering fear that maybe, just maybe, he was the man standing next to you in the grocery store line, or the quiet neighbor who always kept his blinds drawn. Or maybe he was just a shadow, a manifestation of the darkness that exists on the edge of every town, waiting for the sun to go down. But the 1940s didn't have a monopoly on monsters. As the decades turned, as the innocent post-war era bled into the psychedelic 60s, the face of evil changed again. It moved from the rural backroads to the counter-culture centers of the world. It traded the white hood for love beads and long hair. And while Texarkana was haunted by a ghost it couldn't catch, the next decade would birth a killer who wanted the world to know exactly who he was. A killer who didn't hide in the shadows, but danced in the spotlight. The phantom was gone, but the nightmare was evolving. January 24th, 1974. The fog is rolling off the Pacific Ocean, thick and cold, blanketing the western edge of San Francisco in a heavy, damp shroud. Ocean Beach is desolate at this hour. The waves crash against the sand with a rhythmic, violent thud, drowning out the sounds of the city behind the dunes. It is a place for lovers, for solitude, and, on this particular night, for death. In the morning light, the sand is wet and packed hard. A passerby walking near the shoreline spots something that doesn't belong among the driftwood and kelp. It is the body of a man, lying face up, eyes staring blindly into the grey sky. He is fully clothed, but his body tells a story of sudden, frenzied violence. Multiple stab wounds puncture his chest and back, deep, angry slashes that speak of rage, of intimacy, of a killer who needed to be close enough to feel the warmth of the blood leaving the body. The man is identified as Gerald Kavanagh, 49 years old, a Canadian immigrant, a factory worker, a man who kept to himself. He was, by all accounts, a good man, responsible, Catholic. He never missed a shift, never caused trouble, but Gerald had a secret life, one that drew him to the shadowy corners of San Francisco's booming counterculture. He was a gay man in an era where being gay was a liberation for some, but a dangerous secret for others. Police investigators arrive, their shoes sinking into the wet sand. They photograph the body. They note the defensive wounds on Gerald's hands. He fought. He realized, too late, that the encounter he thought was romantic or sexual was actually a trap. He had tried to grab the knife, tried to push the blade away, but he wasn't strong enough. The coroner would later determine that he had been dead for hours before he was found. There is no weapon at the scene, no footprints that the tide hasn't already washed away, just a body on the beach and a city that is about to wake up to a nightmare it doesn't yet understand. San Francisco in the mid-1970s was a beacon. It was a mecca. Young men from all over the Midwest, the South, the rural towns where they felt like aliens, were flocking to the Golden Gate City. They came for the freedom. They came for the community. They came to be themselves in the Castro, in Polk Gulch, in the tender, vibrant, chaotic heart of the gay rights movement. Harvey Milk was on his way to making history. The closet doors were being kicked open, but with that visibility came vulnerability. Predators know where the prey gathers. And in 1974, a new predator had entered the ecosystem. He wasn't like the Zodiac, who taunted police with cryptograms and letters to the press. He wasn't like the zebra killers, who were terrorizing the city with random, racially motivated shootings that same year. This killer was quiet. He was charming, and he had a unique, disarming gimmick that worked every single time. He didn't use a gun. He used a sketch pad. Witnesses would later describe a man, young, African-American, handsome, with a gentle demeanor. He would sit in the bars and supper clubs that catered to the gay community, places like the Truck Stop or the Fickle Fox. He wouldn't aggressively proposition men. He wouldn't lurk in the shadows. He would sit at a table or at the bar, sipping a drink, and he would draw. He was an artist. He would sketch the room, the architecture, the people. And then he would fix his gaze on a specific man. He would start sketching him. It was a brilliant psychological hook. Who isn't flattered by being the subject of art? Who doesn't feel a sudden, intimate connection with the person capturing their likeness on paper? He would show the victim the drawing. "I think I captured your eyes," he might say. "You have an interesting face." The ice wasn't just broken, it was melted. The victim would feel special, chosen. The conversation would flow. Trust was established not through force, but through a shared moment of creativity. And then, the artist would suggest they go somewhere quieter, maybe to see more of his art, maybe to find a better setting for a final portrait. Maybe just to be alone. Gerald Kavanagh said yes to that invitation, and it cost him his life. Months passed. The police filed Kavanaugh's murder away, without leads, without witnesses. It was just another homicide in a violent year. But the artist was still out there, sketching, watching, waiting for the ink to dry on his next plan. June 25th, 1974, 5 months after Kavanaugh was found on the beach. A woman, walking her dog in Golden Gate Park, near the serene Spreckles Lake, sees something in the bushes. It's early morning. The mist still clinging to the eucalyptus trees. The body is hidden, but not well enough. It is Joseph Stevens, known to his friends as Jay. He was 27 years old, a cabaret performer with a bright smile and a talent for making people laugh. He had been seen the night before at a club in the Polk Gulch district, laughing, drinking, alive. Now, he is lying in the dirt, stabbed repeatedly. The violence is escalating. The wounds are savage. There is damage to his lungs, his liver. He has been butchered. Police find evidence that Stevens himself had driven to the park. He had gone willingly. He had driven his killer to the murder site, perhaps thinking they were going for a romantic tryst under the stars. The killer had ridden in the passenger seat, maybe holding his sketch pad, maybe humming a tune, knowing exactly how the night would end. The similarities to the Kavanaugh case are striking, though the locations are miles apart. Both victims were gay men. Both were stabbed repeatedly, with a similar weapon. Both were found in outdoor areas used for cruising, places where men met men under the cover of darkness. But in 1974, the term serial killer wasn't in the common lexicon of every beat cop. Connecting the dots took time, and while the police worked the paperwork, the killer worked the bars. July 7th, 1974. Less than 2 weeks after Joseph Stevens is murdered. The body of a 31-year-old man is found at Ocean Beach, not far from where Gerald Kavanaugh had been discovered 6 months earlier. His name is Klaus Christmann. Klaus is different from the others. He is a German national. He has a wife. He has children. To his family, he is a straight man, a husband, a father. But on this Sunday in July, he is found dead in a cruising area, dressed in casual clothes, with a tube of makeup hidden in his pocket. The scene is gruesome. Klaus has been slashed across the throat. The wound is deep, gaping. He has been stabbed at least 15 times. The rage required to inflict these injuries is palpable. This wasn't a robbery. Klaus still had his watch, his ring. This was personal. This was hate. Or perhaps this was a twisted form of possession. Imagine the horror of his final moments. He meets a charming artist. They talk. Maybe Klaus feels safe because this man seems so gentle, so soft-spoken. They drive to the beach, the sound of the ocean, the darkness of the dunes, and then the transformation. The artist becomes the butcher. The sketch pad is put away and the knife comes out. Klaus, who lived a life of careful compartmentalization, hiding his true self from his family, dies, exposed, and alone in the sand. By now, the San Francisco Police Department is beginning to realize they have a problem. 3 men, all connected to the gay scene, all stabbed, all dumped in outdoor locations. The press begins to pick up on it. But the coverage is muted. These aren't co-eds being murdered in their dorm rooms. These aren't taxi drivers or shopkeepers. These are gay men meeting strangers in parks and beaches. In the moral calculus of 1974 America, their lives are valued differently. They are seen as courting danger, as participants in their own demise. This prejudice, this societal shrug, is the killer's greatest ally. It gives him cover. It gives him time. For nearly a year, the murders seem to stop. Or perhaps the bodies just aren't found. Perhaps the killer moves, or takes a break, or finds other ways to satisfy his urges. The city moves on. The disco era is revving up. The music gets louder The pants get tighter, the parties get wilder, but the shadow remains. May 1975. The silence breaks. Frederick Capin, 32 years old, is found dead behind a sand dune near Ocean Beach. Frederick is a decorated Vietnam veteran. He had survived the jungles of Southeast Asia. He had survived bullets and bombs, disease and despair. He had come home with a medal for valor, working as a nurse, trying to heal people, trying to build a life of peace. And he ends up dead in the sand of his own city, stabbed in the chest. The irony is bitter and suffocating. A man survives a war zone only to be killed by a stranger with a sketch pad. The marks on the sand indicate that Frederick was dragged nearly 20 feet. He was moved after he was killed, positioned. The killer is taking more time now. He is comfortable in the darkness. He is claiming the territory. A month later, June 1975, the fifth victim is found. Harold Gullberg, a 66-year-old Swedish sailor. His body is discovered in a state of advanced decomposition near Lincoln Park Golf Course. He has been dead for 2 weeks. The maggots and the elements have done their work, erasing much of the physical evidence. But the cause of death is clear: slashing wounds to the throat. 5 men: Gerald Kavanagh, Joseph Stevens, Klaus Chrisman, Frederick Capin, Harold Gullberg. 5 lives extinguished. 5 families left with questions that will never be answered. And connecting them all is the phantom artist, the man the press has started to call the Doodler. The nickname sounds innocuous, almost cute. The Doodler. It sounds like a character from a children's book or a Batman villain from the 60 Seconds TV show. But the reality is anything but whimsical. The Doodler is a sexual sadist who uses art as a lure to hunt human beings. He is efficient, he is careful, and he is hunting in a community that is terrified of the police. This is the crux of the tragedy. To catch a killer, you need witnesses. You need people to talk. You need survivors to point a finger and say, "That's him." And there were survivors. In the summer of 1975, investigators get a break that should have ended the case. A call comes in. A man claims he was attacked by the Doodler and lived. This man is not just anyone. He is a European diplomat stationed in San Francisco, a man of status, of power, of international reputation. He tells police about a young black man he met in a bar, a man who drew his picture, a man who suggested they go somewhere private. The diplomat agreed. They went to the diplomat's apartment, and there, the charm evaporated. The artist pulled a knife. The diplomat, perhaps relying on military training or sheer desperate survival instinct, fought back. He was injured, slashed, but he managed to repel the attacker. The Doodler fled into the night. Then, another survivor comes forward, a well-known entertainer, a figure in the arts, someone with a recognizable face and a career to protect. He too had been approached. He too had been sketched. He too had looked into the eyes of the artist and seen the emptiness behind the charcoal and paper. He had been stabbed, hospitalized, but he had survived. Suddenly, the police have descriptions. They have a modus operandi confirmed by living witnesses. They have a physical profile. They even have a suspect. Police detain a young man. He matches the description perfectly. He is an art student. He has a history of mental instability. He has been seen in the bars where the victims were abducted. When they search his apartment, they find sketchbooks. They find charcoal. They find knives. They bring him into the interrogation room. It is a small, windowless box, smelling of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. 2 detectives sit across from him. They lay out the photos, the bodies on the beach, the bloody sand, the slashed throats. They ask him about the sketching. They ask him about the men. And according to police sources at the time, the suspect talks. He doesn't scream. He doesn't lawyer up immediately. He speaks calmly. He allegedly admits to the attacks. He tells them details that haven't been released to the press. He talks about the voices in his head, about his rage against gay men, despite, or perhaps because of his own struggles with his identity. It looks like a slam dunk. They have a suspect. They have a confession. They have survivors who can identify him. In any other case, the district attorney would be drafting the press release announcing the capture of the doodler. But this isn't any other case. And this is 1975. The district attorney looks at the file. He looks at the witness list, the European diplomat, the famous entertainer, and a third survivor, a prominent figure in the community. He tells the police, "I can't charge him unless they testify. This is the law." In the United States, the accused has the right to confront his accuser. You cannot prosecute a murder case based solely on an unrecorded confession without corroborating testimony, especially when the physical evidence linking him to the specific crime scenes is circumstantial. They need the survivors to take the stand. They need them to point at the defendant in open court and say, "He tried to kill me." But to do that, these men would have to out themselves. Imagine the choice. On one side, justice for 5 dead men. On the other side, the total destruction of your own life. In 1975, being revealed as gay could mean losing your career. For a diplomat, it meant being recalled in disgrace, perhaps prosecuted in his home country, his reputation incinerated instantly. For the entertainer, it meant the end of contracts, the end of fans, social pariah status. The stigma of homosexuality was a weapon the doodler didn't even have to wield. Society wielded it for him. The closet was his accomplice. The detectives beg the survivors. "We have him," they say. "We know it's him. But if you don't testify, he walks." The survivors refuse. The diplomat invokes diplomatic immunity to avoid testifying. The entertainer says he cannot do it. He will not destroy his life to put a man in jail. They choose silence. They choose self-preservation. And who can blame them? They are victims too, trapped in a society that hates them almost as much as the killer does. They survived the knife, but they know they won't survive the court of public opinion. So, the suspect sits in that interrogation room. He knows they have nothing. He knows the game. He knows that the shame of his victims is stronger than the power of the state. The police have to let him go. Think about that moment. The detectives have to stand up, unlock the door, and watch a serial killer walk out of the station. They have to watch him step back onto the streets of San Francisco, a free man. A man who has murdered 5 people and tried to murder 3 others. A man who carries a sketchbook and a knife. He walks out into the fog, and he disappears. The doodler was never charged. His name was never publicly released. The case went cold, frozen in time by prejudice and fear. The files collected dust in the basement of the Hall of Justice. The families of Gerald, Joseph, Klaus, Frederick, and Harold were left with nothing. No trial, no verdict, no closure. Just the knowledge that the man who killed their sons and brothers and husbands was out there, living his life. In the years that followed, the Zodiac Killer became a household name. Movies were made. Books were written. Amateur sleuths spent decades trying to crack the ciphers. But the doodler faded into obscurity. He became a ghost story whispered in the bars of the Castro, a warning to young men new to the city. Watch out for the guy with the sketch pad. Why did we forget him? Was it because his victims were gay men? Was it because the lack of a trial denied us the dramatic courtroom finale we crave? Or was it because the story of the doodler forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth? That justice is not blind. That justice is often decided by who the victims are and what society is willing to risk to save them. In 2018, more than 40 years later, the San Francisco Police Department announced they were reopening the case. They released an age-progressed sketch of what the doodler might look like today. They offered a $100,000 reward. They admitted that the suspect from 1976 was still alive, still living in the area, and was still the primary focus of the investigation. They even released audio of an anonymous 911 call made in 1974, believed to be the killer reporting one of the bodies. The voice is calm, detached. "My name is, I'm a citizen," the voice says. "There's a dead man on Ocean Beach. A citizen." That's how he saw himself. Not a monster, not a killer, just a citizen doing his civic duty by reporting the mess he'd made. But despite the renewed interest, despite the DNA technology that solved the Golden State Killer case, the Doodler remains free. The survivors who refuse to testify are likely dead now, taking their secrets to the grave. The opportunity for justice in a courtroom has likely passed. The Doodler is a terrifying reminder that some monsters don't hide in the dark. They hide in the blind spots of our own society. He didn't need a mask. He didn't need a complex escape plan. He just needed us to look away. And for 40 years, that is exactly what we did. 5 men went to the beach looking for connection, for art, for love. They found a knife in the dark, and the man who held it is potentially still out there. An old man now, perhaps watching the news, perhaps sketching in a park, knowing that he committed the perfect crime not because he was a genius, but because his victims were considered expendable. Gerald Kavanaugh, Joseph Stevens, Klaus Christmann, Frederick Capin, Harold Gullberg, say their names, because for 4 decades, the only name anyone remembered was the Doodler. And he doesn't deserve to be the protagonist of this story anymore. The tragedy isn't just that they died, it's that their silence was enforced by the very world that was supposed to protect them. We move now to the 1980s, the era of excess, the era of greed, and in the heart of the American Midwest, a different kind of predator was waking up. A man who didn't use a knife or a gun, but a stethoscope. A man who swore an oath to do no harm, and then spent 2 decades breaking it in the most horrific way possible. While the Doodler hunted on the fringes, this next killer hunted in the light, in the sterile, trusted halls of the hospital, where death is expected, and therefore easily disguised. His name was Michael Swango, and his story proves that sometimes the person you trust with your life is the very person trying to end it. San Francisco, 1974. The summer of love was a fading memory, replaced by a harder, grittier reality. The city was a beacon for the lost and the hopeful, a sanctuary where you could reinvent yourself in the fog. But sanctuaries have wolves, and in the mid-70 seconds, a wolf was walking the streets of the Castro and the Tenderloin, carrying a sketchbook and a smile. He was targeting a community that was just beginning to find its voice, preying on men who were used to hiding in the shadows. He is the most prolific serial killer in San Francisco history that nobody talks about. They call him the Doodler. It begins on January 24th, 1974, Ocean Beach, the western edge of the city where the pavement ends and the Pacific begins. It is cold, damp, the air smelling of salt and decay. In the early morning light, a body is discovered lying face up in the sand, just above the high tide line. Gerald Kavanaugh is 49 years old, a Canadian immigrant, a mattress factory worker, a man described by his landlord as quiet and reliable. He was a devout Catholic, never missed a day of work. To the outside world, he was solitary, almost invisible. But Gerald had a life the daylight world didn't see. He was a gay man in an era where that identity could cost you your job, your family, your safety. His body tells a horrific story. He hasn't just been killed, he has been butchered. Multiple stab wounds puncture his chest. Slashes mark his hands' defensive wounds. He fought. Picture him on that cold sand. The sound of the waves crashing nearby. realizing that the handsome young artist he'd met at the bar wasn't interested in romance. Realizing that the sketchpad was just a prop, he grabbed at the knife, desperate, terrified, his blood mixing with the wet sand. But he wasn't strong enough. Police find him fully clothed. No wallet, no identification initially. Just a dead man on a beach in a city that saw death too often. The coroner determines he had been dead for hours. The killer had walked away into the night, leaving Gerald to the tide. At the time, nobody connects it to anything larger. A mugging gone wrong? A lover's quarrel? The police file the report, and the city moves on. But the killer is just getting started. He has found a method that works. A persona that disarms. The pattern that emerges over the next 18 months is chilling in its specificity. The killer is young, African-American, soft-spoken. He frequents the gay bars and supper clubs of the Polk Gulch and the Castro. Places like the truck stop. Places where men go to find community, to find love, to find sex. He doesn't lurk in the corner. He sits at the bar or a table, and he draws. He is an artist, a cartoonist. He sketches the room, the architecture, the people. It is the perfect icebreaker. It is non-threatening. It is intellectual. It implies a sensitivity, a soulfulness. He spots a victim. He catches their eye. He starts sketching them. Imagine the flattery. You are in a crowded bar, maybe feeling lonely, maybe feeling unseen. And this handsome stranger is capturing your likeness on paper. He shows you the drawing. "I like your face," he says. "You have good structure." The guard comes down. The walls collapse. You aren't being picked up by a predator. You are being appreciated by an artist. He buys you a drink. He is charming, articulate, and then comes the suggestion. "It's too loud in here," he says. "Let's go somewhere quiet. Let's go to the beach. I want to show you my other sketches." It is a trap, baited with vanity and the universal human desire to be seen. June 25th, 1974. 5 months after Gerald Kavanaugh died, a woman walking near Spreckles Lake in Golden Gate Park sees a shape in the bushes. It is Joseph J. Stevens, 27 years old, a cabaret performer, a comedian, a man who lived to make people laugh. He had been named the most talented at his drag club. He was vibrant, a star in his community. Now, he is dead in the dirt, stabbed repeatedly, his lungs punctured, his liver lacerated. The brutality is identical to the Kavanaugh murder. The location is different, a park instead of a beach, but the context is the same. Both were known cruising spots. Both were places where men went to be alone with other men. Police find evidence that Stevens had driven his own car to the park. He had driven his killer there. He had opened the door for him. He had trusted him. July 7th, 1974. Less than 2 weeks later, the fog is thick at Ocean Beach again. Another body. Klaus Christmann, 31 years old, a German national. Klaus has a wife and children. To his family, he is a straight man. But in his pocket, police find a tube of makeup. He was living a double life, balancing the expectations of a traditional marriage with the desires he couldn't suppress. And that secrecy made him vulnerable. Klaus has been slashed across the throat. The wound is gaping, savage. He has been stabbed 15 times in the chest and abdomen. The killer isn't just ending lives, he is obliterating them. He is venting a rage that goes beyond simple homicide. There is a personal fury in these knife strikes. 3 men, 3 similar profiles, 3 outdoor locations. The police are beginning to see the pattern. They are looking for a black male, late teens or early 20s, with a sketch pad. But in a city of nearly 1 million people, it is like looking for a ghost. The doodler takes a break, or maybe he just gets better at hiding the bodies. For nearly a year, there are no confirmed victims. The fear in the community begins to subside. The bars fill up again. The music plays on. Then comes May 1975. Frederick Kappin, 32 years old, a nurse, a Vietnam veteran. He had survived the jungles, the Viet Cong, the mortars. He had received medals for his service. He had come home to San Francisco to heal, to live his life openly. He is found dead behind a sand dune at Ocean Beach, stabbed in the chest. The sand around him is disturbed, showing he had been dragged 20 feet after he died. The killer is comfortable now. He is taking his time. He is arranging the scene. Think about the tragedy of Frederick Kappin. To survive a war thousands of miles away, only to bleed to death on the beach of your home city, killed by a man you thought was an admirer. June 1975. Harold Gullberg, 66 years old, a Swedish sailor. His body is found near the Lincoln Park golf course. He has been dead for 2 weeks. The decomposition is advanced. Maggots, flies. His face is barely recognizable, but the coroner finds the signature, the slashed throat, the multiple stab wounds. 5 confirmed dead. Gerald Kavanagh, Joseph Stevens, Klaus Christmann, Frederick Kappin, Harold Gullberg. The press gives the killer a name, the Doodler. It sounds almost trivial, harmless, like a child with a crayon. But the Doodler is a sexual sadist who is hunting with impunity. And here is where the story takes a turn that makes your blood boil. A turn that explains why you have never heard of this man, why there was no movie, no trial, no justice. In the summer of 1975, the police catch a break, a massive break. A survivor comes forward. He is a European diplomat stationed in San Francisco. He tells police he met a young man in a bar, an artist, a sketcher. They went back to the diplomat's apartment. The young man pulled a knife. A struggle ensued. The diplomat was cut, but he managed to fight the attacker off. Then, another survivor, a nationally known entertainer, a celebrity. He too had been approached, sketched, lured, stabbed. He survived, hospitalized with chest wounds, but alive. Suddenly, the police have eyewitnesses. They have descriptions that match perfectly. They have a suspect. Police detain a young man. We won't name him here because he was never charged. But the police know exactly who he is. He is an art student. He has a history of mental health issues. He has been seen in the bars with a sketch pad. They bring him in. They put him in the box. And he talks. According to investigators involved in the case, the suspect confesses. He admits to the stabbings. He admits to the murders. He speaks with a chilling detachment about his hatred for homosexuals, a hatred possibly born from his own internalized struggles. He tells them things only the killer would know. The detectives are elated. They have solved the case. They have the man. They are ready to go to the district attorney and file 5 counts of first-degree murder. But then, the reality of 1975 crashes down on them. The district attorney looks at the witness list. He looks at the survivors, the diplomat, the entertainer, a third prominent community figure. I need them to testify, the DA says. I cannot prosecute on a confession alone. I need them to point him out in court. The detectives go to the survivors. They plead with them. We need you to take the stand. We need you to identify him. And the survivors say no. The diplomat invokes diplomatic immunity. If he testifies, he outs himself as gay. His career is over. He will be recalled. He will be disgraced. The entertainer refuses. I have an image, he says. I have fans. I cannot be known as a homosexual. It will destroy me. The third survivor refuses. I have a family. I have a reputation. They choose silence. They choose to protect their secrets rather than punish a mass murderer. This is the tragedy of the Doodler case. The weapon wasn't just a knife. The weapon was the closet. The weapon was a society that stigmatized gay men so severely that they would rather let a serial killer walk free than admit to their own identity. The Doodler relied on that shame. He counted on it. It was his insurance policy. The police are helpless. Without the testimony, the confession, which was never formally recorded or signed, is inadmissible. They have no physical evidence linking him directly to the scenes. No DNA in 1975. No fingerprints on the sand. So they have to let him go. Picture the detectives sitting in that room, looking at a man they know is a monster. A man who has butchered 5 people. And they have to unlock the handcuffs. They have to open the door. They have to watch him stand up, smooth his shirt, and walk out of the station. He walks out into the San Francisco fog. A free man. The Doodler was never charged. His name was never released to the public. The case went cold. The files were boxed up and shoved into the archives. The families of the 5 dead men were left with nothing. No closure. No justice. Just a hole in their lives, where a person used to be. The Zodiac Killer got the movies. He got the fame. The Doodler got anonymity. He got to live his life. In the years that followed, the suspect remained in the Bay Area. He didn't flee. He didn't change his name. He just lived, quietly. Perhaps he stopped killing. Perhaps he found other ways to vent his rage. Or perhaps there are other bodies out there, buried in the dunes, labeled as Jane and John Does, victims of a man who knew that nobody was looking for them. In 2018, the San Francisco Police Department announced a new reward, $100,000, for information leading to the arrest of the Doodler. They released an age-progressed sketch of the suspect. They admitted that the man they questioned in 1976 is still alive, still a person of interest. They released a snippet of a 911 call from 1974. A voice, calm and eerie, calling from a payphone near the beach. "My name is, I'm a citizen," the voice says. "There's a dead man on the beach. A citizen." That's how he sees himself. Just a citizen. But the silence holds. The survivors who refused to testify are likely dead now. The opportunity for a trial has slipped away. The Doodler remains the ghost of the Castro, a terrifying reminder that justice isn't blind. It's selective. And for Gerald, Joseph, Klaus, Frederick, and Harold, justice wasn't just blind, it was absent. They died because they trusted an artist. They remained unavenged because society decided their reputation was worth more than their lives. But while the Doodler slipped back into the obscurity of the streets, another killer was preparing to operate in the spotlight. A man who didn't hide in the shadows of the counterculture, but stood tall in the most respected profession in the world. He was handsome, he was brilliant, and he was a doctor. And in the 1980s, Michael Swango would prove that a white coat and a stethoscope are the perfect camouflage for a monster. The humidity in Calcutta hangs heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating blanket that clings to your skin even after the sun goes down. It is June 1989. The monsoon rains have turned the dust of the streets into a slick, dark mud. In the city of joy, life spills out onto the pavements. It is a city that never truly sleeps. A cacophony of horns, shouts, and the relentless machinery of millions of people trying to survive. But for the thousands of pavement dwellers, the beggars, the ragpickers, the laborers who have nowhere else to go, the night is supposed to be a respite. A brief pause in the struggle. They lay their thin mats on the concrete, wrap themselves in rags, and close their eyes, trusting that the city will let them wake up the next morning. But in the summer of 1989, the city breaks that trust. It begins in the shadows of central Calcutta. A man sleeping alone, curled up against a shop shutter near the bustling Esplanade area. He is invisible to the commuters who rush past him during the day. He is part of the background, part of the scenery of poverty that the city has learned to ignore. But tonight, someone sees him. Someone watches him. A figure emerges from the darkness. He doesn't carry a gun. He doesn't hold a knife. He doesn't need to bring a weapon because the city provides one. He looks down at the sleeping man, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep, exhausted sleep. The figure bends down. His hands find a heavy slab of concrete, a paving stone, or a loose chunk of masonry. It weighs 30 kilograms. Maybe more. He lifts it. The strain tenses his muscles, but he moves with a terrifying, silent purpose. He stands over the sleeper. He raises the stone high above his head, and then he drops it. Gravity does the rest. The impact is sickening, a wet, crushing sound that is swallowed by the ambient noise of the metropolis. There is no scream. There is no struggle. The victim dies instantly, his skull shattered, his life extinguished before he even knows he is in danger. The killer doesn't rob the body. He doesn't rifle through the rags for the few rupees the man might have collected. He simply turns and walks away, disappearing back into the mist and the shadows, leaving the stone resting where it fell. A tombstone placed by the murderer himself. When the sun rises, the morning commuters find the body. The police are called. A report is filed. An unidentified male, likely a beggar, dead from head trauma. In a city as vast and chaotic as Calcutta, a single murder of a homeless man doesn't make headlines. It is a tragedy, yes, but a quiet one. The police assume it's a dispute between vagrants, a fight over territory, or money that went too far. They clean up the scene, take the body to the morgue, and the city moves on. But the killer isn't done. He is just getting started. A few weeks later, it happens again. Another homeless man, another quiet street, another heavy stone crushing a skull in the dead of night, then another and another. By the time the third and fourth bodies are discovered, a chilling pattern emerges that the police can no longer ignore. The victims are all pavement dwellers. They are all attacked while sleeping. They are all killed with a heavy stone or concrete slab found nearby. And they are all killed in the dark hours before dawn, when the city is at its quietest. Panic begins to ripple through the streets. The newspapers catch wind of the pattern. They give the killer a name, a moniker that will become synonymous with terror for an entire generation of Calcuttans. They call him the Stoneman. The name evokes a primal fear. It sounds like something out of folklore, a demon made of the very earth beneath their feet. But the Stoneman isn't a myth. He is flesh and blood, and he is hunting the most vulnerable people in society. The attacks are clustered in central Calcutta Esplanade, Chowringhee, the approach to the Howrah Bridge. These are the hearts of the city, bustling hubs of commerce by day that turn into desolate canyons of concrete by night. The psychology of the Stoneman is baffling to the investigators. Serial killers usually have a type, a specific victim profile that feeds a sexual or psychological fantasy. But these victims are destitute men, nameless, faceless, with nothing to give. There is no sexual assault. There is no theft. There is only the pure, unadulterated act of crushing a human life. It suggests a killer driven by a deep, pathological hatred for the poor, or perhaps a compulsion that finds satisfaction solely in the mechanical act of destruction. Think about the terror that descends on the pavement dwellers. These are people who have no walls to lock, no doors to bolt. Their vulnerability is absolute. As the body count rises 6, 7, 8 victims, the nights change. The homeless stop sleeping alone. They begin to cluster together in groups, huddled in tight circles, taking shifts to keep watch. They arm themselves with sticks and metal rods, staring out into the darkness, jumping at every shadow, every footstep, every rustle of a stray dog. But the Stoneman is elusive. He seems to drift through the police patrols like a ghost. He knows the rhythms of the city better than the officers who are trying to catch him. He knows when the patrols pass, and he knows when the streets are empty. One survivor, who narrowly escapes an attack, describes a shadowy figure looming over him, a dark silhouette against the streetlights. But he can't see a face. He can't identify a man, just a presence, a force of nature. The police are under immense pressure. The public is outraged. The press is screaming for an arrest. But the investigation is hampered by the very nature of the crimes. There is no forensic science to speak of in 1989 Calcutta that can help them here. The murder weapon is a rock, usually a piece of the pavement itself, which means it's covered in the dirt and grime of the city, useless for fingerprints. The victims are often unidentified, meaning there are no family members to interview, no enemies to trace, no timelines to construct. Desperate for a breakthrough, the Calcutta police launch a massive crackdown. They flood the streets. They round up hundreds of people, petty criminals, mental patients, vagrants, anyone who looks suspicious or out of place in the dead of night. The interrogation rooms fill up. They question suspicious characters, known thugs, and the mentally unstable. They are looking for a madman. The brutality of the crimes, the lack of motive, the specific method, it all points to someone suffering from a severe psychosis. Profilers speculate that the killer might be a sadist who derives pleasure from the sound of the skull cracking, or a schizophrenic following the commands of voices only he can hear. Some even whisper about dark tantric rituals, suggesting the killings are sacrifices. But despite the dragnets, despite the hundreds of detainees, the killings continue. In September, the terror reaches its peak. The Stoneman strikes with impunity. The city is on edge. People in high-rise apartments look down from their balconies at the dark streets below, wondering if the man walking slowly down the block is a commuter heading home late, or the monster looking for his next stone. The class divide in the investigation becomes painfully clear. If these were wealthy businessmen or college students being murdered in their beds, the city would have shut down. But because the victims are the wretched of the earth, the response, while frantic, feels futile. The Stoneman doesn't just kill, he creates an atmosphere of paranoia that pits the city against itself. Vigilante justice begins to take hold. Groups of young men patrol the neighborhoods. Any stranger found walking at night is accosted, questioned, sometimes beaten. In their desperation to find the monster, the people of Calcutta begin to turn on each other. An innocent mentally ill man is nearly beaten to death by a mob who mistakes him for the killer. The fear is contagious, spreading like a virus through the humid air. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stops. By the end of 1989, after claiming at least 13 lives, though many believe the true number is much higher, the Stoneman vanishes. The rhythmic thud of stone on bone ceases. The police wait. The pavement dwellers wait, sleeping with one eye open, gripping their sticks. But the killer doesn't return. Did he die? Did he get arrested for a different, unrelated crime and languish in a prison cell, his secret locked away with him? Did he simply move on? Years later, a similar series of murders would rock Bombay, now Mumbai. The Stoneman moniker would be resurrected. The method was the same. A heavy stone, a sleeping victim, a crushed skull. The Bombay police would eventually arrest a suspect, but they could never conclusively link him to the Calcutta murders. The timeline fit, the method fit, but the proof remained elusive. The Stoneman of Calcutta remains one of the world's most terrifying unsolved mysteries because of what he represents. He wasn't a charismatic predator like Ted Bundy. He wasn't a clown like John Wayne Gacy. He was a shadow, a phantom who exploited the ultimate vulnerability of the human condition, the need to sleep. The case exposes the terrifying reality of the less dead victims whose lives are deemed less valuable by society and whose deaths, therefore, go unsolved. The Stoneman operated in a blind spot, a gap in the social fabric where human beings are treated as debris. He didn't need to be a genius to get away with it. He just needed to choose victims that the world had already stopped caring about. Imagine the last moments of those 13 men, the hard concrete beneath them, the humidity wrapping around them, the exhaustion of a day spent begging or laboring. They drift off to sleep, perhaps dreaming of a meal, of a home, of a better life, and then darkness. Absolute, crushing darkness. They never saw the face of the man who killed them. They never knew why. They were simply erased. To this day, the files on the Stoneman murders gather dust in the archives of the Kolkata police. No name has ever been written on the line marked perpetrator. No justice has ever been served. The stones he used are still there, part of the pavement, part of the city, silent witnesses to a massacre that happened in plain sight. And in the bustling streets of Kolkata today, where the pavement dwellers still sleep under the open sky, the legend persists. A story told in hushed tones, a warning to the children of the streets. Be careful where you sleep. Be careful who watches you from the shadows. Because the Stoneman might be gone, but the darkness he moved through is still there. The Stoneman didn't just kill individuals, he killed the sense of safety for an entire population. He proved that you can kill repeatedly, brutally, and publicly. And if you pick the right victims, you can simply walk away. He is the ultimate urban predator, the boogeyman who turned the city's infrastructure into a weapon. For the families of the victims, if they had families, there is no closure. There is no grave to visit, often no body to claim, just a police report number and a memory of a life that ended in a flash of violence. The Stoneman case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about serial murder. Sometimes the bad guy wins. Sometimes the monster walks free. He lives out his life, perhaps growing old, perhaps raising a family, perhaps walking past the very spots where he committed his atrocities, smiling at the secret he carries. And that is the true horror of the Stoneman. Not just the violence, but the silence that followed it. The silence of the authorities, the silence of the victims, and the silence of a city that, eventually, just went back to sleep. But in the annals of true crime, the Stoneman stands as a grim reminder. A reminder that evil doesn't always have a face. Sometimes, it's just a silhouette standing over you in the dark, holding a stone, waiting for you to close your eyes. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't a carefully plotted thriller. This was visceral, messy, and real. The Stoneman of Calcutta didn't need complex rituals or elaborate ruses. He stripped murder down to its most primitive form. Man, rock, death, and nobody knows who he was. Consider the psychological toll on the city during those 6 months. Every morning, the city held its breath. Every report of a body found on the pavement sent a fresh wave of panic through the slums. The police were helpless, chasing shadows, fighting a phantom. They consulted psychiatrists who sketched a profile of a tall, dark, well-built man, perhaps a sadist, perhaps a tantric. But profiles don't catch killers. Evidence does, and the Stoneman left none. He was a ghost in a city of millions. He could have been the man selling tea on the corner. He could have been the laborer carrying bricks at a construction site. He could have been anyone, and because he could have been anyone, he was everyone. He was the manifestation of the city's violence, a concentrated point of rage that burned white-hot for 6 months and then vanished. Even now, decades later, when the monsoon rains hit Kolkata and the streets turn dark and slick, there is a memory that surfaces, a memory of the summer of 1989, a memory of the sound that no one wants to hear, the sound of a heavy stone hitting the ground. The case of the Stoneman of Calcutta is a stark, brutal chapter in the history of serial murder. It challenges our understanding of investigation, of motive, and of justice. It reminds us that in the teeming metropolises of the world, where millions of lives intersect every day, it is terrifyingly easy to disappear. And it is terrifyingly easy to make someone else disappear He didn't use charm like Bundy. He didn't use the promise of jobs or money like heavy-handed recruiters. He didn't need to lure anyone anywhere. He came to them. He entered their world, the world of the pavement, and he turned it into a slaughterhouse. He is the worst kind of monster. The one we never caught. The one who got away with it. The one who reminds us that justice is not a guarantee, but a luxury. And for the 13 men who died on the streets of Calcutta in 1989, it was a luxury they couldn't afford. As we move away from the humid, fear-drenched streets of Calcutta, we find that this pattern, the targeting of the invisible, the marginalized, the forgotten, is not unique to India. It is a thread that runs through the history of serial murder like a dark vein. It crosses oceans and borders. It speaks to a universal darkness. Because while the Stoneman was crushing lives in Calcutta, halfway across the world, another predator was preparing to strike. Another man who realized that if you prey on those society ignores, you can kill forever. The Stoneman's legacy isn't just the bodies he left behind. It's the blueprint he inadvertently exposed. A blueprint that shows how systemic apathy can be the serial killer's greatest accomplice. When the police don't look hard enough, when the media moves on too quickly, when the public disassociates from the victims, the killer thrives. He grows bold. He feeds on the indifference. So, who was he? A madman? A genius? A misanthrope? Or just a violent man who got lucky? We will likely never know. His identity is lost to the chaos of time and the teeming crowds of the city, but his actions remain etched in the pavement. 13 lives. 13 stones. One ghost. The Stoneman of Calcutta. A name that fades into history, but never truly disappears. A name that belongs on the list of the worst serial killers you've never heard of. Not because of his fame, but because of his obscurity. Because he proves that you don't need to be famous to be a monster. You just need to be cruel. As night falls over the city today, the pavement dwellers still lay out their mats. They still sleep on the concrete. And somewhere, perhaps, the Stoneman sleeps too. Or perhaps he is gone, returned to the dust from which he seemed to emerge. But the stone remains. Heavy. Cold. Waiting. The transition from the chaotic, crowded streets of Calcutta to the organized clinical hallways of a hospital might seem like a shift from darkness to light, from danger to safety. But as we've learned, monsters don't just live in the shadows. Sometimes they wear white coats. Sometimes they hold the very tools meant to save us. And sometimes the place you go to be healed is the place where you meet your end. Because while the Stoneman used a rock, our next subject used something far more subtle, but just as deadly. He didn't need the cover of night. He operated under the bright, fluorescent lights of the ward, hiding behind a badge of trust. But before we leave the streets of Calcutta, take a moment. Picture the stone. Picture the sleeping man. Picture the silence. And realize how thin the line is between waking up and never waking up again. The Stoneman was a force of blunt trauma. He was brute force incarnate. But there are other ways to kill. Quieter ways. Ways that leave no bruises, no broken bones, no bloody scenes for the morning commuters to find. There are killers who whisper death into your veins. Killers who smile as they watch the light fade from your eyes. Checking your pulse not to save you, but to make sure you're gone. The Stoneman taught us to fear the dark. But the next story will teach us that we shouldn't always trust the light. Calcutta, 1989. The year the city held its breath. The year the stones spoke. The year the monsters proved that they are not just under our beds. They are on our streets. They are in our cities. And they are watching, always watching. When you stare into the eyes of John, Eric Armstrong, Henry Louis Wallace, Ronald Dominique, Andre Crawford, and Nathaniel White, you don't see the caricatures of evil that Hollywood has trained us to expect. You don't see the raving lunatic or the obvious outcast hiding in a dungeon. You see the man bagging your groceries, the sailor serving his country, the fast food manager joking with his staff, the neighbor walking his dog, and that is the terrifying reality that binds these disparate nightmares together. These men didn't just rely on their own cunning to evade capture for so long. They relied on us. They relied on our indifference. They hunted in the blind spots of society, targeting women and men whose disappearances were greeted not with a manhunt, but with paperwork, sex workers, drug addicts, the homeless, the poor, victims who had been pushed to the margins long before they were pushed into a stranger's car. The killers knew that in the eyes of the law, some lives were unfortunately worth less than others. They gambled that police wouldn't talk to each other across parish lines. They bet that a missing sex worker in Detroit or a vanished drifter in the Louisiana bayou wouldn't make the evening news. And for years, they were right. They operated in the silence that we created. It is easy to look back with the clarity of hindsight and condemn the investigators who missed the signs. But we have to remember the landscape they were navigating. This was an era before digital surveillance, before instant databases, before DNA was the silver bullet it is today. These killers exploited a fractured system. They used the chaos of poverty and the limitations of analog police work as a shield. Armstrong moved between international ports, leaving the jurisdiction before the body was even cold. Dominique used the vast, murky waterways of the bayou to wash away his sins. Crawford hid behind the crumbling infrastructure of Englewood. They were competent, they were calculated, and they were terrifyingly patient. We often obsess over the rock stars of the true crime world, the Bundys, the Dahmers, the Gacys. We memorize their names, analyze their childhoods, and turn them into mythic figures of evil. But the predators we've discussed today achieved something far more disturbing. They achieved longevity. True success for a serial killer isn't a Netflix documentary or a catchy nickname. It is silence. It is the ability to operate for a decade, killing 10, 20, 30 people while the world turns its back. Henry Louis Wallace cried at his victims' funerals. Andre Crawford walked children to school, while bodies decomposed in the buildings next door. They didn't hide in the shadows. They hid in the light. They wore the mask of sanity so effectively that even their wives, their mothers, and their co-workers never saw the monster underneath until it was too late. But the mask always slips. Eventually, a witness survives. A DNA test evolves. A detective refuses to let a cold case stay cold. And when the mask falls, we are left with the wreckage. Dozens of families destroyed. Generations altered. Empty chairs at dinner tables that will never be filled again. The tragedy isn't just that these men killed. It's that they were allowed to kill for so long because we refused to see the value in the lives they were taking. They stole mothers, daughters, sons, and brothers, turning vibrant lives into cold case files, banking on the hope that no one would care enough to look for them. These cases prove that evil can thrive in the quiet corners of our cities. They show us that the monster is often the familiar face at the door. But they also prove that no matter how much time passes, no matter how cold the trail gets, the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. Science advances, persistence pays off, and sometimes, even the most elusive phantoms are dragged into the light decades after they thought they were safe. There is one case that redefined what is possible in the pursuit of justice. A predator who terrorized California for years. A shadow who seemed destined to remain a ghost forever, until a genealogy website changed everything. If you want to understand how the ultimate cold case was finally solved, and how technology is hunting down the monsters of the past, watch this video on the Golden State Killer next.